a lot to cover tonight, a lot of material. First off, I'd like to say that I'd like to thank Kristen Cooper, who in the email chains, emails fly around all day long, reminded me that we should be gracious in the way we address issues. So I'm going to be a little more gracious in the way I describe the out-of-control corruption I'm going to discuss tonight.
Can we vote on that?
All right, so we're going to move through this quickly, and I can take questions because it's a lot of stuff. But I'm going to, before we get into my Tentacles presentation, I want to bring you up to speed on You Are Here. And I will be discussing this, so bear with me. Right now, on July 1st, Senate Bill 513 becomes law in Tidewater. And when it does, everyone in this room, except bankers and special interests, are going to be very unhappy. How did we get here? Well, it all started right after World War II. Right after World War II ended, the Cold War began, and as a part of the Cold War, we needed to have a federal interstate highway system. So President Dwight Eisenhower launched the federal interstate highway system for mobility of troops, also to create 5-mile lanes for strategic air bombers. And to pay for all of that, we instituted federal gas tax and we put tolls on turnpikes. But the result of that action was suburbs. We didn't have those before. We had commuters from urban centers because we built this amazing highway system. Right after World War II, the United Nations was created. And the United Nations is not always our friend, and they have come up with Agenda 21 and ICLEI. And those two factors play into what we have in Senate Bill 513. If you're not familiar with ICLEI, ICLEI is a global international council for local environmental initiatives. And ICLEI is basically the loss of your property rights. It's focused on sustainable development, and it's based on a concept of saying everyone will live in high-density urban centers. All the land surrounding urban centers will belong to the collective to grow food, will not belong to private people. And this is a global effort through the United Nations that worked its way into the federal and state legislation that we now have with Senate Bill 513. So, in 1962, the Federal Highway Act was passed. We created something called a Metropolitan Planning Organization. And then the person that began this was President George Herbert Walker Bush. And he passed a piece of legislation called ICE-T in 1991. It was followed up by President Clinton, but it was Vice President Al Gore who led the initiative, and he wrote the T21 legislation. And in that, he codified the term social justice and applied it to the federal gasoline taxes. So we took what was the Eisenhower highway money and we started to create social justice. So the federal government created metropolitan planning organizations. Those of you in this room know this acronym. We have been taxed enough already. In a strange twist of fate, President Bush took that and turned it into the Transportation Equity Act, T21. T21 bears into Agenda 21 from the United Nations. Agenda 21, sustainable development, is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is the antithesis of liberty and free choice. And it is not property rights. So therefore, it is un-American. Here locally, we are the spearhead in Tidewater. They call it Hampton Roads. And we have a transportation planning organization, and we have a Transportation District Commission of Hampton Roads. And collectively, those General Assembly and federally created institutions control our transportation in our region. We have a regional government that you do not elect. It is an all-appointed regional government. If you attend the meetings, it is a citizen hostile, it is infected with special interests, and it has created an abomination of good governance in Virginia. And that abomination is a layer of government unaccountable to you in this room to make decisions about your quality of air, your land use, and of course, your transportation. It is a massively taxpayer-funded lobby. Future Hampton Roads, under the people that run our newspaper, Frank Batten Jr., the Hampton Roads Partnership, a spin-off of that, and the Chamber of Commerce are all deeply in bed with this regional agenda. For those of you that aren't familiar with our Commonwealth, we are a Dillon Rule state. This is Judge Dillon. Judge Dillon said local governments should not have the power to tax, but that their General Assembly should restrict that power, and that it should be run by the state. As a Dillon Rule state, every city, town, county is a political subdivision of the Commonwealth through the General Assembly. Because of that, the powers that we have locally in our cities only come from the General Assembly. The monster of regional government that Senate Bill 513 has now unleashed upon all of us is the product of our General Assembly. This is what you have. Now, this sign talks about smaller government, and we stand for smaller government. This is the opposite of smaller government. What you have up there is the General Assembly and the governor. They have created an all-appointed Commonwealth Transportation Board that spends all our money and decides what our tax dollars are going on. We have a Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transit, a Virginia Department of Transportation, and a Virginia Port Authority. That next layer comes down to 21 planning district commissions. We're planning district number 23. And then underneath those, in order to manage Hampton Roads Transit, we created the Transportation District Commission of Hampton Roads, all appointed. Our Metropolitan Planning Organization has been rebranded as the Transportation Planning Organization, and it is staffed by the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. We pay millions of dollars. You pay millions of dollars for all of this stuff. Okay? Then you have Mr. Moss, who sits as a local representative in our local government. You elect him, he's accountable to you at your city council. This layer of regional government is unaccountable to you. So what did the Republican-led General Assembly do? Did they eliminate the Transportation District Commission and the TPO and replace it with something that could control the whole thing? No! They created a brand new appointed body that sits on top of it and confuses all the power and control of all the rest of these things. You're going to pay for it, and it's funded for with your tax dollars. How did this happen? Well, 1968, we had the Virginia Development Act for developers. Then we had the Regional Cooperation Act, which created regionalism, part of Agenda 21. Regional Cooperation Act spawned our PDCs. Something most people don't know. Hampton Roads Transit, we have this regional thing here. And there's a thing called a cost allocation agreement, and that's how HRT gets paid. But you don't know is that Mayor Sessoms from Virginia Beach and Mayor Frame from Norfolk are secretly rewriting this out of view of the public. This is happening right now. This has a cost allocation agreement that says, basically, based on your population and the amount of service you have, and Virginia Beach is the most populated city in the Commonwealth, we have to pay for our share of the overhead costs and expenses of Hampton Roads Transit. Hampton Roads Transit's budget last year was $93 million, folks. But Hampton Roads Transit is in financial distress, needs to raise their fares, can't do it, and in a year, they're going to be bankrupt. They're going to have to, I don't know what they're going to do. How is this paid for? It is a dedicated local tax source for local funds, and it spends federal tax dollars and it spends state tax dollars. And we're billed by our service hours, and we're billed by our service miles. How many buses do we have? How much light rail do we have? That's a formula that we have to pay in our taxes to this unaccountable regional entity. That's just to bring you up to speed with where we are. So now, why tentacles? Why tentacles?
Everybody's pockets.
When I began to do this presentation for Waverly, a lot of people helped contribute. And a woman named Beth Allen opened my eyes through emails. And what I discovered is shocking. What I discovered is TowneBank.
Mere sessions.
TowneBank was founded and began in 1999 by Bob Alston in his garage. It is a local bank. He started that, opened for business in April 1999. Here's good old Bob. This month, Democratic Governor McAuliffe appointed him to the Virginia Port Authority. That's interesting, TowneBank. Mr. Alston said we've been one of the most successful startup banks in the country and a well-kept secret. Just to give you an idea of these tentacles, one of the premier people in TowneBank was Betsy Duke. Betsy Duke, former town banker, was appointed to the Federal Reserve Bank, and she orchestrated the bailout of the mortgage companies under President Obama. That was her idea. So here's good old Betsy Dukes. Now remember our political subdivisions? In Virginia Beach, we have the Virginia Beach Development Authority. It is a political subdivision of the Commonwealth. Betsy Duke used to be appointed to our Virginia Beach Development Authority, and now she has stepped down and she's with the Harry Walker Agency collecting large fees to tour the country to talk about how she bailed out the banks and mortgages. Why do you care about TowneBank? You need to care because TowneBank controls your regional government and half of your General Assembly. Don't believe me? Interesting. Take a look at this list, folks. We'll start off with the head of TowneBank, Robert Alston, who was appointed to the Virginia Port Authority. Then we go down to Aubrey Lane, TowneBank director, who's now our Secretary of Transportation. We're going to talk about him more later. Mayor Sessoms, Mayor Frame, Mayor Johnson, Sheriff Ken Stoley, Tina Sennett, Sheriff Jim Sullivan, Delegate Chris Jones, Delegate Ron Villanueva, Delegate Johnny Joanno, Senator Mimi Locke, Senator Louise Lucas, who co-sponsored 513 with Senator Frank Wagner, and State Senator Tommy Norman. All directors and on the payroll of TowneBank. Every one of them. TowneBank's total assets from that little garage last year were $4.6 billion. It is the largest bank headquartered in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Life is good at TowneBank. What about TowneBank? Well, even Mayor Hawley, over in Portsmouth, from our Portsmouth friends, was a director of TowneBank. They have over 200 directors. They're connected to everything. Most recently, in Virginia Beach, we bailed out the Cavalier Hotel. And if you study the way the deal was arranged, you had TowneBank taking the $18 million of our tax money and giving it to TowneBank. It's amazing. It's everywhere. Frames and sesame. A malignant cancer. Those are Beth Allen's words, not mine, but they're very accurate. This is paid for with your tax dollars. This is our 2014 Community Profile publication in Virginia Beach. Page 9 is a full-page ad for TowneBank. And they're listed as Virginia Beach's key industries and strengths. Curtis Colgate, near and dear to a lot of people in this room. He owned the Cavalier Hotel, and as a part of the deal that was set together with TowneBank, he ended up pocketing $77 million, and it went over to our good friend Bruce Thompson on the 31st Street Hotel. So he now is in the middle of this deal. The tentacles go on and on and on. And they're even worse. So let's talk about Aubrey Lane. Who is Aubrey Lane and why do you care? You should care. Nobody in this room elected Aubrey Lane. But Aubrey Lane is making decisions for over 10,000 state employees and billions of your tax dollars. Aubrey Lane is a director at TowneBank. 2009, Governor Tim Kaine, Democrat, appointed him to the Transportation Board, the Commonwealth Transportation Board. Aubrey Lane is a lifetime Republican. 2010, Governor McDonald appointed him to the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel Commission, where he is now chairman. And this year, Governor McAuliffe made him the Secretary of Transportation. And he's commended Lane and Governor McDonald for House Bill 2313 last year, which raised $1.4 billion a year in new tax money. The largest tax increase in the history of Virginia. This is Governor McAuliffe's webpage. He's announcing that Lane, a lifelong Republican, and has been kicked off, and he's appointed him to head up this group for the Commonwealth Transportation Board. The same Aubrey Lane was the president of the $479,000 political action campaign that put out these false and misleading mailers and ads on light rail in our light rail referendum. Keep in mind, at the time, he was supposed to be representing you on the Commonwealth Transportation Board, but he ran a political action committee to get this taxpayer boondoggle funded by misleading people on what the referendum is all about. Here's a picture of myself debating Aubrey Lane at the Republican breakfast right before the election on the referendum. We went at it. I asked him face to face in this photo, how do you justify that? And he said, I believe we need light rail. It's for the benefit of the region, and whatever it takes to get the job done, that's what we'll do. The ends justify the means. You didn't vote for this guy, but he is in charge of things. Well, let's take a look at this for a minute. $479,000, he's with Great Atlantic, PAPCO, all this. Same group contributes to Mayor Will Sessoms. He put the Move Hampton Roads PAC, provides you all this information. He headed this up. His number 2 was Billy Harrison, former city council member from Virginia Beach. So what do we got? A pack of lies. Aubrey Lane, Billy Harrison. Will Sessoms, because of the regional government, was the chairman of the MPO, so he appointed Billy Harrison to be the chairman of the Citizens Transportation Advisory Commission to represent the view of you, the citizens, on the MPO. This is an ad. This just kind of shows you that all the things that they talked about in their ads are completely misleading, since light rail does nothing to reduce traffic congestion, and even the proponents of that will tell you that. Exactly. Right now, as a part of Senate Bill 513, everything will require a smart pass on your car. And in order to get electronic tolling, you had to pay $1 a month fee. So Aubrey Lane said, well, that's not fair, and you people in Portsmouth are very familiar with this. So here's some breaking news. Today, Governor McAuliffe said, it's all right, we don't need the $5 million in tax revenue this is going to generate, although we don't really have the money. You don't have to pay the fee. I'm being magnanimous. So State Senator John Miller sponsored the bill, and today they signed it into law. So Governor McDonald appointed Aubrey Lane to the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel. He created this sweet deal on the Route 460 that we have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on, and the new governor just canceled. So we threw all that money away. But the deal was to set up Aubrey Lane to be the chairman of that, so he got a large fee for running this new Route 460 entity. Republican. It's a non-profit that the state created to issue bonds to finance Route 460. Bonds. TowneBank. Bonds. Interesting. So, Governor-elect made him our Secretary of Transportation. 10,000 employees, $5 billion budget. But the question is, who is Aubrey Lane? He's a property manager for Great Atlantic Properties. His job was operational activities, new business acquisition, cash flow improvement. Before that, he worked at Hoffheimer's. And before that, he was a certified public accountant at KPMG. He's now your appointed Secretary of Transportation, drawing down the big bucks and running the state's transportation. This article has a lot of information, but this was just recently announced that Mayor Sessoms and Aubrey Lane have reached an agreement to build light rail and run it to town center on a special contract, putting a nail right through the heart of maglev or any other options. We have a $6.6 million study that isn't even completed yet. We haven't picked a local alternative, but to put the kibosh on that and get moving on this light rail, Aubrey Lane and Will Sessoms, 2 TowneBank directors, somehow have managed to sign a deal. Now, I've got a city council member here. It's interesting because the ordinance that was passed after the referendum specifically states that the city council has to vote to accept the deal. So it's interesting that this deal has been announced between the state and everybody. So that brings us up to speed with Senate Bill 513 and House Bill 1253, the Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission. It's anything but accountable. And House Bill 2, which talks about reducing traffic congestion and economic development.